Well, hey, this is Jerry bringing you another episode of What's Broke Today. Today we have a bad boy zero-turn mower, which it's an older one. It's a bad boy pup that we got an oil leak, and of course, getting started, I degreased everything. So because the leak was, this area in here was, just all oily and dirt and junk. And I don't know if you can see, but as much as I tried to degrease, still up there farther, I didn't get everything off, so I have to clean it up when I get the motor off. But clean everything off. Let me get moved around here, and then make sure it's full of oil. And I started it up. All right, so I took the camera off the tripod because it's hard to move the tripod, not bump into everything. So. But if we look up here around, because this is the oil sump, and then the bolts that hold the sump on, and then up higher where we see these fins, that's part of the engine block. And if we look around here, we can see how we're all dirty. And even after I degreased, I didn't get all that. When we come farther around here, you can see where, that's probably where I cleaned, but on farther around, you see this little, where it's nasty and then nice and clean. Well, I think that's from our oil leak, because right up in there, kind of, I don't know if you can see the tip of the screwdriver, but in that area is where the engine block and the oil sump meet. And I don't think I can get a shot with the camera, but when it's running, you can literally see the oil come out of the gap in between the engine block and the sump right here. You can see the oil just come out and run down. So that's where our leak was coming from. So I've got a new gasket ordered, new crankshaft seal. I got an oil filter and new oil to go in it. So I'm gonna start taking this thing apart. Now, of course, if I got the camera moved down underneath, and as you can see, a lot of that reflective is oil. I'm sure this thing's been leaking a little for a while, but getting the engine off, on this, really isn't bad at all, because we got deal with our deck belt, which Ash is here trying to help. So, and luckily the springs on these, it's not hard to roll this belt and take it off very carefully, and then push it up out of the way. The ground drive belt on this, if I can get my wrenches on it, but loose. Ow! Sure you heard that? I whacked the tripod. But yeah, so we can loosen the jam nuts and then back them off. And I'm going to edit out some of this stuff that I'm doing, because I'm sure watching me loosen this up, we can save probably, 4 or 5 minutes, because I can't get a socket on it and use my air ratchet. It's behind the frame bracket there. Which I edited part of this out, because I figure you need to see me taking this bolt out of the spring. So I have to go ahead and take the spring off, and that takes our tension off, so I can, the belt will come off. And of course, looking at the belt, it's all oil soaked, and that around you can see big crack in it. So I'm gonna go get him a new belt, and then we gotta get our electric clutch and our crankshaft pulley off, which I got my impact wrench. And they zip tied the wire to the anti-rotation bracket, so cut that. And I cut a few of the zip ties up top that were holding wiring harnesses that I figure you'll need to see most of that. And then my gun up, and I just loosen that up, and then everything out of the way, and then push that up and take the bolt out. And then that slides right down off there, and You can see it's loaded with oil. I'll just slide that over out of the way and keep track of goopy things like this washer that went up in between the crankshaft pulley and the electric clutch, because this needs to go back. And I'm not sure it matters on this one, but on some cases these washers, pay attention to how they come off, because some of them are chamfered on one side or the other, so they are designed to go on just one way. And I got to go get an Allen wrench, because this actually has a set screw in the pulley. And look at that crankshaft, how clean it is. I might get lucky and loosen that set screw, and this will pull right off. And another thing I got going on right now, which if you hear a funny noise in the background, I have a device to suck the oil out of the engine, but that's in pretty bad shape. So you can see it's got all kinds of cracks, and some of this is age, some of it's from the oil, but it being oil soaked, we should replace it, and I am. Now I'm going to do a better look at this deck belt, because this belt, he said, was not very old, and it's got a little bit of wear, but when I was talking to him about it, he wants to go ahead and reuse that belt. And of course we got our idler and get things apart. Always spin the idler pulleys, make sure they turn smooth and they don't have a bunch of play in them. And then even like this, which we got a grease zerk, so we can grease this. And a little bit of play is okay, but you don't want much. And then these are our pulleys for our pumps. So, and I may actually see if there's some way I might, while I got the engine off, I may actually take this outside, because all this under here needs cleaning. I mean, I got oil all around. I mean, it's from stem to stern. So let me go get an Allen wrench. Get that loose. I just dumped out all the Allen wrenches. And believe me, you can do this as well. Now the big question is how snug is that on there? And that feels on there pretty tight. And so this is a stamped steel pulley, so you think the greatest thing to do is grab something here and grab it and pull, which sounds good but ain't always the best. I went and got a couple different pry bars, and of course a dead blow hammer, because if I hit the bottom of the crank, I don't want to do that with a metal hammer. But I'm going to start out with, I can go over the pulley and actually get up there, which I don't know if you can see. Yeah, that might work. I'm actually on the top of, well, see, and there it moved easy, on top of the pulley, and then prying on the frame, and that way I'm not on this outer edge, and that's actually coming off. And there we go. So you see another spacer. This one looks the same on both sides. So that shouldn't matter which direction it goes on, because it's that side, I would say, is what was up, because you can see where that is kind of reflective there, and on this side it's more dull. So there's that. And of course, watch for the keyway, which this time it stayed in the pulley. Our electric clutch usually has the keyway built in, and I've also got this seal. And another thing I look at while we're here is, which we're going to luck out, because, a lot of times when you pull those pulleys off and you look up here, you know, when you look right here in between the seal and the end of the crank, I mean, I can wipe off what's on there and it's still shiny. So sometimes you'd need to sand this, which I've had to go as far as to pop the seal out, sand it, because this has to be able to slide up through the bearing that's part of the sump. So that's got everything down here, and you can see I'm really not that difficult of a job. I mean, even though I'm not showing everything, but you know, I'm gonna have to disconnect the fuel line, disconnect the wires from the starter, pull out our bolts holding the engine down, which I think I'm gonna start on that while I'm underneath. Pull one out. And see, sometimes the bolts go up and they screw into the engine. Well, on this mower, it's a bolt with a nut. Now I'm going to go ahead and stop the camera while I pull out the rest of the engine bolts. Now, of course, I think I forgot to mention, the engine we're working on, this is a 25 horse. It's a Kohler Command. Early motor. This thing was built back, looks like 2004. So as you get newer, and actually I said 25, this is the Pro 27. That, come back here, right down here, Command Pro 27. Now another thing you'll come across is like this one. Move the camera a little closer. Where this has the commercial air cleaner, and of course it's got these supposed to be one-time use clamps, and I don't keep them as one-time use. I got me a little tiny screwdriver that I've kind of modified and ground on a little. I can stick down in between where it was crimped, get it down in here and just wiggle it back and forth and make that gap a little wider, and try not, you know, deform it too bad. But get it where it's got play in it, and then I can come up underneath here and run this that little screwdriver around, and you can hear the hose start coming loose from the aluminum fitting, and you work it a little, and because the only other choice you got is to cut it and then put a regular hose clamp on it, which works, but I just go ahead and do this because, you know, these things are on the mowers. It's you can't pop it apart. It's put together, and that's where it's designed to stay. So, but I just take my screwdriver and work it around, and as you work it, you can kind of hear the, you know, where it's coming loose and not being as stuck. And once you get it to a certain point, then it'll move, and that comes off, and we can finish taking the rest of the air cleaner off. Now, another thing, you know, just when you're taking these bolts out, pay attention to how they come out, because like my engine bolts down here, you know, you got two that were opposite corners of the engine from each other, and this one was on the bottom, and yeah, I think no, this one was one on this. You had the bolt coming through the bottom, through the frame, through the engine, and then it went through the ground cable, and then it had the flat washer, the lock washer, and the nut. So it was on, you know, This all on top and just the head of the bolt on the bottom. Whereas this one, which if you look at that washer, see if I can hold it, it's kind of cone shaped. The hole that this one went through on the bottom, so they had the bolt, the washer, or the flat washer, then it went through the frame, through the engine, then just had the lock washer and the nut on top. So we need to put it back the same way we took it apart. And of course I'll clean these up good. I'm actually going to put them back. I'm going to use thread lock on the thread, so you know, because after having them apart and they're full of oil and grease, you know, take a chance of them coming loose. And of course spread that apart and we'll pull that out. And then I got to go get a Phillips screwdriver and a 5/16 socket there. But luckily the screws will come right out. And then I'll go get okay, I'm going to keep those there because when I get this off, I'm going to put those back in. And I'll show you why. And see, like here, when I pull these out, I got the bolt, a big flat washer, and then that's got a nylock nut on the back side. I just always take and put them back together. So the nut and washer is with what it belongs with, and then this will come out of the way. And then these screws also hold this plate, and that's got our choke and our throttle attached to it. So I'll go ahead and put the screws back in to hold that plate. And I'm going to take a rag and stuff in the hole. Just make sure you always pull that out. And then we'll take our throttle cable. And of course, another thing is this, where the throttle hooks up has 3 holes in that arm, which usually you can look for wear, but this one was hooked in the middle hole. So I'll need to put it back in that hole when I put it back on. And then the choke only has one, so get it out of the way. And like this, it's running through a bracket up on the motor up farther up, so we'll want to make sure we put it back there. And then the last thing to deal with is, and see down here we got the main harness coming from the chassis, and it's a tight, well, I said tight, that unplugged almost too easy. And of course these 2 extra wires we got here were hooked to nothing. Then we got a blue wire hooked to a blue wire, and it's a straight, so we'll unplug that. And then this little wire, I took a zip tie off of it. This goes to the hour meter, and it also reads engine speed. And we just unwind this, and then whenever we get done, we'll put this back on the same way it was and put a zip tie on it. And we'll get that out of the way. And then down here on the bottom of the starter, and of course, first thing I did, I unhooked the battery, because otherwise we could be sparking right here, because the other end of this positive cable is on the battery. And when I take that nut off, we get the battery cable comes off. We got the orange wire that powers the electrical system of the mower, then a white wire that's our start wire. And of course, I'll put the nut back on the starter. Then if you got help, this is a great time to get help, because these aren't light, but be careful, you can just pick them up move it down to the ground, waddle it around a little, turn that down, there we go. I just walk this out. I'm going to flip it upside down. Now I'll probably have to get something to put underneath the back side, because let's see if a jack stand's the right height. There we go, jack stand works. And like right around here where that seal's at, I want to clean that really good. Yeah, because you can see, I mean, how nasty we are here, and all up here where I didn't get it cleaned before. So I need to take that out and do a better job of cleaning. And then other thing on these that likes to leak, upside down, this one has an oil cooler on it right here, and the blue hoses. And of course it's not high pressure, because it's hard to move the camera while I'm looking upside down. These just have little spring clamps, so we know it's low pressure, but these are notorious for leaking. I'm going to take off these spring clamps and put worm drive clamps. And then I've also got the adapter. I move it here, wrong way. There we go. So if you don't have an oil cooler, the oil filter butts up against the oil pan. But when we had the cooler, we put that in there, then the filter. And I went ahead and got the new O-ring that goes in between the adapter and the engine, or the sump, just so we can change that. So I'm going to start pulling out bolts, and I'll be back. All right, just about ready to pull the sump off. But the last thing I got all the bolts out. And of course, when I was taking it apart, most of the bolts were this bolt. And I had one that was silver. Have no idea why we had a silver bolt. It's the same length, same threads, but it's different. So I remembered it was in the front corner on the oil filter side, so I'll put it back in that same spot. For now, I just took the two bolts out of the oil cooler so I could pull it up away, unhook the pulse line for the fuel pump, and and needless to say, when I was taking these bolts out, the two that were near where I was leaking weren't tight. So yeah, we pick that up, pull it up off there, and flip it over. And you see our gasket got sucked in right there. But that's dirt. So the gasket, we got a crack here. It's broke, and that was clear inside the pan. We're all cracked here, and that was inside the pan. And of course, we broke here, but that just stuck to the block. And there it is. And next thing I do is clean all the gasket stuff off. And of course, I don't have my new gasket. That the later versions of this used RTV silicone. So, but yes, luckily, it's like here, it's not stuck. Just stuck, looks like right around the bolt holes. So I'm going to peel as much off. Oh, see, that's nice, that come off. So we have very little cleaning, because this surface needs to be, and we don't need no gouges or marks in it, because any place that there's a gouge is a spot where oil could leak. So I'll wipe this off and dry it, and of course we don't want to get anything down inside the engine. And there was a spot of dirt that fell down in there, and you can see, the inside of this is, I'll move the camera a little bit. pretty doggone clean in there, and he's done a good job of changing the oil, because when I even look down inside the oil pan, I mean, I don't see any sludge at all. And we're talking, this motor is, well, basically 19 years old. So yeah, I mean, this is in excellent shape. Like here, I'll wipe. When I wipe, I always wipe from the inside out, just so I don't knock none of that down inside. But I got just a little tiny particle there, and let me take the camera off. If you really want to get technical about it, which I don't know if you can see, but see how the surface looks here. Let me move see if I can get the light a different way. Battery's dead in that. But when we come across here, we can see the aluminum shiny, but then starting right about here, and there's a little line this way, that it's still this shiny where the gasket was sealing good, but then, you know, here it comes shiny up here and out to the front here, but then this whole area right in here is discolored, and that will be where the oil was coming out at. So I'll finish cleaning this up, and then I'll get with you before I start putting her back together. Now, while we're cleaning gaskets, I'll turn this a little like that. Now, this piece that I had up here, I mean, I just very carefully took my razor blade. I get a new one and make sure the edge is clean. And I got underneath that, just kind of worked around it and popped it free. You know, and had to go all the way around. And then, like over here where I got those, I just very gently, you know, take the razor blade and go up there and try and shave them off. And then the last little thing I do is I take the razor blade, hold it 90 degrees, and I just drag it across. And then, I didn't have a towel ready, but I'll drag it across and wipe off the razor blade carefully so I don't cut my fingers. And I'll do that a second time. Come up across there and see, like right here I got a little spot, but that's actually, it looks like a piece of gasket. It's actually a tiny casting flaw. So you can take this, hold it 90 degrees and drag it, and it'll clean off that last little bit on the surface. It's back in. You can't have oil down in the bolt holes. And where you got a blind hole, I just tear off a piece of my rag, you know, like so, and I'll take it and roll it just like you're getting ready to smoke something, and just stick it down in the hole and let it soak up the oil. Any place where the hole is open on the back side, it won't accumulate anything. Up around the outside, and then the last thing before I lay the new gasket on, I'll take one of my blue towels, spray it with brake clean, and then just lightly clean that surface. And I'll do the same thing to our sump. That's set up. Now, this stuff I'll just gently start peeling it off what's loose. And luckily, this, even for the age of this gasket, it's coming off relatively easy. That I would say when this was originally put on, they used a very thin coat of silicone, which I'm not opposed to that in any way at all, because I've been known to do that myself. But that's what, wipe that off, and then Luckily this one is one of the best. I've done this where this gasket is so glued on there that you almost want to get out your one of those Scotch lock discs. And of course the cat's here to help too. But yeah, just very gently work my way around the bolt hole. Yeah, it's on the very outside edge of that corner. It's stuck pretty good. Now see up through here. Yeah, see I got past there, you can see it popped free. And see that, I mean, yeah, it didn't take hardly nothing. And believe me, this is not how it normally goes. I pull this up out of there. Now this hole is how it feeds the oil up into the upper side of the block, and this will go in and end up at the crankshaft where it goes up through the top of the block. And then also it's because this engine actually has hydraulic lifters that when you pull them out, they look like which I've never actually measured to make sure, but they look identical to what's in a small block Chevrolet. So yeah, so we got to make sure that's whole and we don't get any dirt down in there. And then this alignment pin, I'll put it back in the block because that'll hold the gasket straight, because I'll put the gasket on the block, then I'll slide the sump down over, and we'll also look here at the crankshaft where the seal rides and make sure we don't have any excessive wear there. And also look inside, because it's actually a bushing for a bearing here on the lower end of the crank. So we want to look for excessive wear in there, and that's just take your flashlight and shine and look around, because if it's wore through, it'll stand out like a sore thumb. You know, but I don't expect to find much, because when I did the wiggle on the crank before I pulled the sump, I didn't have any movement that I could feel. And if you can feel any movement, then you got to figure up if do we need a crankshaft, do we need a sump, or do we need both? And you see any wear inside of this, bushing, they don't sell that separate. You got to buy the whole oil pan assembly.